Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon. This is John Suntress. The show's going to start in about a minute. Do me a favor. I know that commercials can be annoying. Thank you. Let me thank you in advance for listening to all the commercials all the way through. We're going to have another minute of commercials before we get to the show, but it's going to be a great one today, I promise you. But a couple show notes. If you want to contact me, the best way is via email, john@wordballoon.com. And of course, I'm on Twitter @JohnWordBalloon. I'm on Facebook under my name and also the Word Balloon Network. My YouTube channel, I've reached 1,000 subscribers. I always want more. It's going to be a busy 2 weeks for me. The podcast is going to be my main focus, but I promise you before the end of the month, I will start YouTubing shows beyond representing the podcast here at YouTube, but it's under Word Balloon. That's where my channel is. Please join me there. And as always, thank you very much for your support and patronage. One more spot, and then we'll start the show. But as always, thanks for listening. Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress today. Man, I am so excited about the 2 episodes that are dropping today. Later on, you're going to hear from James Tucker, who's talking about the evolution of DC animation from his days working on the Batman animated series through the Justice League years of Justice League and Justice League Unlimited to him doing all the DC features that we've all loved and have been somewhat controversial as well. Things like Batman Hush, Death of Superman and Reign of the Supermen, so many other movies, really from the Flashpoint Paradox all the way to this year's releases. So that's the other episode that's dropping today. But you're listening to this episode because it features the great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. 2 years ago, I had the pleasure of talking to Kareem about his work with Titan Comics on Mycroft Holmes and just his real love of nerddom. He's one of us. It's amazing. I saw him in 2016 at Comic-Con giving a panel of his Mycroft Holmes novel, and then he wrote the graphic novel for Titan, which you can still get, and we talk about a bit. But he really was one of us. I mean, he's a kid who learned how to read because of comic books, and even into his Laker days, playing with the Los Angeles Lakers, in his locker room, he had copies of Heavy Metal because he really appreciated the comic books of Heavy Metal. So all that said, Kareem is one of us, and man, the guy, I've said this before, he's doing these wonderful essays writing for the Hollywood Reporter, and thank God Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is right there on the front lines of today's culture wars, from heavy-duty stuff and talking about things that the Trump administration does that he doesn't agree with, comparing the culture wars of what he experienced from the 60s through today. The guy has perspective. And of course, when it comes to comparing the Marvel movies to, I guess, high cinema, if you're a Martin Scorsese believer, or also Steven Spielberg, Francis Ford Coppola, actors like Jodie Foster and Jennifer Aniston added their voices to the chorus of, these things aren't movies, they're carnival rides. But once again, it takes a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to kind of put some perspective and calm each side down with what he's saying. So in a couple minutes, I'm going to talk about and read to you from his Hollywood Reporter essay, and then we will play my conversation with Kareem from October of 2017. Yeah, it was only 2 years ago, but I really think to reinforce where he's coming from, it's great to hear him talk about nerddom in general and let you hear his nerd bona fides, for a lack of a better word, and show that he really is one of us, both with things he likes and things he doesn't like. But that's going to be fun. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on today's Word Balloon. It's all brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you greatly, League, for your support via Patreon, patreon.com/wordballoon. If you want to subscribe to Word Balloon, if you'd like to help out the cause, Word Balloon is free. But I got to be honest, man, the radio world is getting scary out there. I'm getting less shifts, and thank God for the podcast, and thank God for you, League of Word Balloon listeners, because I really do think we got something good going on here with the content that I share with you each week and each month, and you're helping keep the lights on, literally, out here at the Suntress Batcave, and I thank you greatly for that. So if you want to help out the cause, do you think Word Balloon is worth the price of a comic book a month to you? Is it worth $1 a month to you? I hope so. I'm trying to give you really interesting content you won't find anywhere else, like this conversation with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, like the other episode that's dropping today with James Tucker. So if you want to help out the cause, you can either click on the Patreon ad at wordballoon.com. That will take you to my Patreon page, or you can go to patreon.com/wordballoon directly. But thank you greatly for your sponsorship, League of Word Balloon listeners. Word Balloon is also brought to you by Aftershock Comics, another group that's keeping the lights on here at wordballoon.com. Aftershock is great, man. I'll tell you, and I mean it. I enjoy a lot of their books, and they keep surprising us with incredible comics from some of our favorite names in comics. You know, whether it's Garth Ennis or Marguerite Bennett or Tim Seeley or Cullen Bunn, my good friends Phil Hester and Ryan Kelly, Chris Sabella, Stephanie Phillips. So many great fresh voices in comics and great art as well, backing them up. Adam and Aidan Glass, the father and son team, that's making some great comics as well. These are great books, and they're very genre-bending books. And I think you'll find something that will interest you at Aftershock Comics. God, even people like Brian Azzarello and Mark Waid have contributed to the Aftershock library. Now, in the days and weeks ahead, I'll be talking to more Aftershock creators about their comics. You don't have to wait, though. You'll find full story descriptions, preview pages, and the diamond codes on their books and how to order them through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. So midday Friday, after Martin Scorsese makes this big, bold statement that he doesn't think the Marvel films are real cinema and calls them, carnival rides and the like. And Jennifer Aniston also this weekend adds her voice to the chorus, as I said earlier. These aren't the first people from Hollywood to kind of shit on the Marvel movies. Jodie Foster has made the same claim a couple of years ago. Coppola and Spielberg have used the same language that Scorsese did, calling them, they're carnival rides. They're not. It's not real movies. Well, again, I'm kind of torn because I really do respect these filmmakers and actors, but by the same token, they're not seeing the reality here of what's going on with the studios. And I mean, we all know it, but let's readdress this. These movies obviously are making sick money. I mean, I remember the days when cracking 100 million was a real achievement, and it wasn't that long ago. I mean, even the first, and again, not to use the superhero movie example, but when that first Ben Affleck Daredevil movie cracked 100 million, that was a big deal. When Coming to America cracked 100 million in the 80s, big deal. The Batman 89 movie, you name it. And now these Marvel movies are making between 700 million to $1.5 billion. The Avengers movie, $1.5 billion. So, and it's like that same thing of when I read that there were some people on the left that were complaining that Kevin Feige is going to make a Star Wars movie. It's like the guy makes hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars for studios. No offense, but shut the fuck up. You want this guy making Star Wars. He knows what he's doing. But back to today's subject of, Scorsese and his complaints about comic book movies. As I said before, thank God for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, because he's been writing these wonderful essays at the Hollywood Reporter, mostly, again, about the culture wars, politics. I suppose, I'm shrugging, this is kind of a culture war subject, but, he said some great things in this Hollywood Reporter column, and I'm going to read a couple paragraphs from it and really the final paragraph as well. But again, he kind of cuts to the heart of this thing, and I get it, and he gets it. So listen to what Kareem has to say. This is from his column from the Hollywood Reporter. Director Martin Scorsese's claim to Empire magazine that Marvel films aren't cinema is like saying the novel 50 Shades of Grey isn't literature. He's technically wrong, but he's culturally right. And all the outraged defenders of Marvel films know he's right. I include myself among Marvel's defenders as both an enthusiastic fan and recent Marvel Comics author. I've seen the entire Marvel comic universe pantheon multiple times. Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor Ragnarok are two of the most addictive movies ever made. If I'm channel surfing and even catch a glimpse of them, I'm riveted. At the same time, several of Scorsese's films, Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, are among my favorites for their emotional power and thematic depth. I'm aware that the international popularity of Marvel films make them very influential in positively adjusting social attitudes about race, gender, and sexual orientation. Every time I see Black Panther, I feel a rising swell of pride because we finally have a popular black superhero, and he's not just powerful, but he's also kind and compassionate. Captain Marvel, Black Widow, and Wonder Woman, DC, are definite improvements from Barbie as role models for young girls. But influence, even for the betterment of society, isn't the issue. Scorsese wasn't denigrating Marvel films so much as making a distinction between high art, an accurate but cringe-worthy term that we might see in a museum or featured on NPR, and regular everyday art that we might see on our t-shirts and tattoos. Scorsese is stating the obvious. Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee is not in the same level as Coolidge's Dogs Playing Poker, no matter how much those dogs make us smile. Nor will Peter Benchley's novel Jaws ever match the magnificence of Herman Melville's Moby Dick, despite selling millions more copies. Captain America will never be James Baldwin. It's an important distinction to make because we are wrapped up in our vision of high art. Because wrapped up in our vision of high art are the cultural ideas, moral values, and social vision that define who we are and who we want to be. Our best art reflects our highest aspirations as well as our flawed approach in obtaining those aspirations. The angels of our reach, the devils of our grasp. And he wraps up his final, really read the whole thing. It's fantastic. But he says, Scorsese admitted he's never seen a Marvel movie all the way through, and I feel sorry for him that he hasn't experienced the sheer joy, humor, and excitement of these films. That he didn't see Robert Downey Jr.'s touching death scene as Iron Man, or Tom Holland's infectious wonderment at becoming Spider-Man, or the delightful banter of Hulk and Thor. Marvel films have made us laugh, cry, jump, everything. With Marvel melodrama, we feel better. With high art, we are wiser. It's amazing. It's a great, excellent essay. Also, by the way, if I didn't know this because I haven't purchased it, I guess Kareem is in that Marvel 1000 comic, so he's got a story in there. But again, he gets it. You know, he also wrote a great essay about the Joker movie, and it's called Why the Joker Gun Violence Protests Missed the Mark. I love the guy. I really do. I've been a fan of his since I was a little kid, when I was first watching him with the Bucks and the Lakers in the 70s into the 80s. I love the fact that he's a Jazz fan. And really, I think his role today as a great, strong voice to cut through all the bullshit of these culture wars, I'm really glad he's out there on the front lines. And you'll hear me thank him about that. You know, he's a very modest man. And he's a genius. I mean, he's one of these, you've heard the phrase Renaissance man. Well, if you consider the dozens of books that he's written, these essays, so many, his love of jazz and appreciation of jazz, beyond his athletics. Have I said that much about his athletics in this conversation? Of course not. And there's not much basketball talk. Or, hey, remember that scene in Airplane? Or how about you fighting Bruce Lee in Game of Death? All cool things. But I knew there were subjects that he had talked about a million times. And in fact, coming from the sports talk radio world, I talked to a lot of my friends who had interviewed Kareem in the past. And they're like, don't get hung up on the obvious, because he gets bored really fast. And I just wanted to show him how much I appreciated the thinking side of his career. And not to say that there wasn't thinking in his basketball strategy. And the guy's a basketball legend. I mean, his career speaks for itself, and he deserved every accolade and continues to throughout basketball's history. No one's ever going to forget Kareem Abdul's contributions to the NBA. But culturally, his contributions have been so much more. And again, man, going back to when he was a college kid and a high school kid in New York and then at UCLA in college, he was right there on the front lines of the culture race wars of the 60s. So he knows. And again, comes with this amazing perspective. So anyway, I encourage you to read his essays at the Hollywood Reporter, not just about nerd subjects, but about politics and just society in general right now. It's great to have his voice out there, and it's great that he was able to share some time with me right now. This is from late September. I posted it in October of 2017. A wonderful conversation with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar about his love of the Sherlock Holmes pantheon and his contributions with his Mycroft Holmes stories, his love of comics, other nerd things as well. You're not going to believe the film franchises that he's a big fan of, but it was really a delightful conversation, and I was so pleased to do it, and I'm happy to represent it now on Word Balloon. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, welcome to Word Balloon. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and congratulations on some really fun Sherlock Holmes universe adventures.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad you've enjoyed it.
Absolutely. The Apocalypse Handbook Mycroft Holmes in the Apocalypse Handbook, the graphic novel. Is it fair to say, in terms of, without spoiling, kind of the beginnings of Mycroft's adventures that lead him to where we see him in the Conan Doyle novels?
That's really what I was trying to do. You hit it right on the head. I was trying to give him some backstory. Arthur Conan Doyle only mentions him about 4 or 5 times in all of the original stories. So we really have no idea what made him who he ends up being in those stories. So that left a whole huge area for me to deal with my imagination, and that's how we came up with these ideas about Mycroft.
It's a lot of fun, the graphic novel in particular, because of the steampunk backsetting that you put into it and the real people that populate the story as well. And I've heard you on a couple other interviews, and it sounds like you got intrigued by Mycroft in the same way that I think a lot of us readers did, in terms of, when Sherlock himself says he is the British government, and obviously seems to be smarter than Holmes.
Yeah, he has a different approach on what we would call, genius, but it's very, very formidable and very effective. And he's a troubleshooter for Queen Victoria, and then that's it. That's all we're left with. Where do you go from here?
Well, you take it in some great directions. Were you aware, because obviously you're one of us, and forgive me for even suggesting that you wouldn't be, but it's always, as I'm sure you know from maybe talking to other people in the geek culture, it's it's always so cool that somebody like yourself is also into this stuff. And also I'm wondering, what do you think of when they call it the nerd culture or the geek culture? I always have that reflex of, oh, that's almost negative, and we're more fun than that.
But we were the kids that like to read. Come on, and comic books were like a guilty pleasure because all the teachers at school wanted us to be reading, Dickens and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Well, the great thing is clearly you were also such an adventure fiction fan of Robert Louis Stevenson and Jules Verne, and that influence is evident in the graphic novel in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of this stuff, Ivanhoe, and then. Sure. The Sunday paper, the Prince Valiant, and Mandrake the Magician.
Yeah,
all those. I grew up on all of that stuff.
Did you? I'm always interested because in these days we've got the specialty comic book stores and stuff. Did you get your comics at the newsstand, the candy store? What was your young experience like with buying comics?
The candy store.
Cool.
Here in my on the main street in my neighborhood, Dykeman Street.
That's fantastic. Did I guess you grew up more in the DC era, or did you read more than just superhero comics?
DC era, with a few Donald Ducks in there.
Sure.
And later on Flash and Black Hawks and all that.
Oh yeah.
Stuff.
That's excellent. Yeah. Did you have favorite artists or favorite writers? Were you able to kind of figure out once they started putting the credits on, oh, this is the good writer or the good artist?
Well, later on, when I got into the more adult stuff, so that would have been in the 70s and 80s, I subscribed to heavy metal. I really liked Bilal,
sure,
Richard Corbin, Mobius, those guys. I really enjoyed their stuff.
That's fantastic. You're a world traveler. Did you ever have a chance to meet some of the classic comic book writers or artists?
No, but I didn't. I met Stan Lee.
That's cool. That counts.
Cooler than everything, man. I was sat next to him on the plane, flying cross country, and midway through, we struck up a conversation. It's Stan Lee, and oh my God, I told him about all the comic books I'd read. He was thrilled. Nice guy.
That's fantastic. Back to the Holmes world. Based on some of these interviews I heard, you grew up like I did on the Basil Rathbone, Nigel Bruce movies, I'm guessing, on television?
Yeah. On Saturdays, me and my boys at somebody's TV, whoever's mother would tolerate us. We'd watch it and made sure we didn't mess up the furniture and stuff.
Are you watching any of the current adaptations of Holmes? Or, given that you're writing in this world, are you kind of I know Max Brooks and Robert Kirkman kind of avoided each other in the zombie world because they didn't want to steal each other's ideas. But are you watching any of Sherlock or Elementary or that stuff?
Yeah, I both of them, and I thought that they're both really well portrayed. Those guys really understand Sherlock, and in their portrait of him.
Sure.
Wonderful, wonderful stuff, and great adaptations of that mindset to the 21st century. Thought that was remarkable.
I'll confess that Elementary, because they made Watson a woman, it kind of bummed me out. I think Lucy Liu's a fine actor, and I think Johnny Lee Miller is a fine actor. But I always felt like Holmes and Watson really was this like bromance. Two men who really did love each other, and just admired the hell out of each other.
Yeah. That's the classic take on it. So when you get away from that, it's different, but they really understand who Holmes is.
Okay.
And really, make it believable.
I hear you, man. That's cool. I also want to know, I saw your panel at Comic-Con last year in San Diego, and had you been to Comic-Con before? Are you a guy that have you ever gone to any of these comic conventions?
I'd gone one time previous to that.
What do you think? Is it fun, or is it too crazy, or too much?
Well, I mean, everybody else, they can go to Las Vegas and that crazy. Why can't comic book fans go someplace and that crazy?
Absolutely.
Yeah, everybody's like living their fantasy, amongst a whole lot of other aliens.
Are there other sci-fi things that you're into? Are you a Star Trek guy? Are you a Star Wars guy? Both?
I watched Star Trek a little bit, but I was going to college at that time, and just studied. Kind of made it impossible. It was either Star Trek or get an F, and I wasn't going to do that.
I hear you. No, I understand. You were busy, and man, I'll tell you, it was fun as a kid watching your college career and also your pro career. And one of my first Scholastic biographies was you. And it was a pleasure to read. And I also thought, really, last year or 2 years ago, that HBO documentary did an incredible job. I thought.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Were you pleased?
Yeah, I absolutely.
And congratulations on the book about you and Coach Wooden. I'm really looking forward to reading that. That's going to be some good wintertime reading for me. I know it came out in the spring, but a really nice part of the documentary was this incredible relationship you had with John Wooden.
Yeah, it was not a whole lot of stuff that I wanted to go public with because it was so personal, and private. That's how I felt about it. It's something that I wanted to protect, but I was convinced that, I needed to share it, and, I'm glad I did it.
Well, you're incredibly prolific. 12 books, is that right? 12 now?
Yeah.
And, and now the comic as well. What's compelling you to write at this stage in your life? Well,
just being an avid reader my whole life, most people like us think that we have a great book in us,
Sure.
So I gave it a shot, and I managed to do pretty well. And I stuck to what I knew. My first book was a history book, one that I absolutely felt needed to be written, and it did well. So, that encouraged me, and I've stuck with it.
What was that first history book? What part of history was it about?
It's an overview of Black history, and I kind of focus on the U.S., but just to explain Black history.
Have you, as far as the geek culture, have you gone back and looked at some of the great Black comic creators like Matt Baker from the 40s and 50s, and Ron Moore? A great 70s, Marvel artist, and certainly Dwayne McDuffie, a more recent example, the late great Dwayne McDuffie, Dennis Cowan, people like that.
No, I'm not familiar with them, and it's too bad because in all probability I've seen their stuff, but I can't identify them as Black cartoonists. Just admired the quality of their art.
I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, because honestly, you obviously had a different life experience than I did, and also maybe I'm a generation behind you. I'm in my early 50s, but I wonder, as kids that grew up during the space age, I think it really opened up our imaginations to a lot of possibilities. And as someone that's slightly older, I wonder how you felt about that.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about because I can I can remember when Sputnik went up.
There you go.
And that was like a big deal. All the people that had listened to Tom Corbett, Space Cadet, on
I know what you mean.
one step closer.
Right. Well, and also, and forgive me, but I wonder if you felt the same way. I know that the laws of science don't work this way, but I thought for sure by the 21st century we'd all have jetpacks. And we'd all be cruising around in jetpacks. Because it really seemed like in the 60s, they were really close. I mean, you'd see them at, half times. I don't know if they did it in college basketball or the NBA, but I certainly saw it in college football and pro football.
They have jetpacks now that work.
Well, but I'm saying that we'd all own them. We'd all be flying around like the Jetsons in our jetpacks.
What we come through with was the flying car, man. Come on. That's the one.
That's true. It is cooler. That's fantastic. What did you, again... when they really started in the 60s having more black characters and stuff, was that great, or was that, okay, here's another superhero?
Everything was fraught with so much, passion about it, It shouldn't be abnormal, but it was. And it was, geez, what is this?
Sure.
And it was kind of that kind of thing.
I hear you. Back to the graphic novel, I love the art. Did you have supervising, kind of power to say, yeah, let's go with this team as far as the art team?
Well, yeah, we had some, but, we wanted to let the guys do their thing. They didn't tell us how to write the story, so I'm not going to tell them how to interpret it visually as long as they stick to the story. And they did a great job. They
sure did. It's very clear storytelling, I think. And
yeah, very, very clear, and they got it done the right way. I'm thrilled with him, and the colorist. He did a great job.
Absolutely, that's great. Are you reading any current comics these days?
Well, I found out that Heavy Metal has started to publish again.
Yep.
And I've gotten I got my hands on a few recent copies of it just yesterday, and it was great.
That's cool.
So, yeah, and they've done some nice reproductions of the comics from the 30s and 40s and 50s.
Yeah. Oh, really? And so, are you reading those? Are you reading any of those, comic strip, collections and things like that?
Yeah, like Phantom. They had a nice Phantom one. I used to read that and Mandrake on Sundays.
Sure, absolutely, man.
I had to keep up with what was happening with Mandrake.
And Prince Valiant, as you said earlier, too. That's I'm kind of bummed that, they do still, newspaper comics do exist, and in fact, you can even subscribe to them digitally and get them delivered daily and stuff from things like King Features Syndicate. But, there really was some magic there, and also, they weren't written for 10-year-olds. I mean, adults were following Steve Canyon and Mandrake and the Phantom and all that.
Exactly. And I remember a good friend of mine in Chicago, he had flown in the Korean War. And so I just, I'm thinking like 15 years ago, I was in a store and I ran across a copy of Smiling Jack. And I jumped on it and got it and I sent it to him because that was his nickname.
Wow.
Smiling Jack Childers. And I sent Jack a compilation of several episodes of Smiling Jack that every Sunday in the comics. He was very cool.
Understood, man. And I think a few decades ago they were kind of reprinting comics, but it seems like some of these companies now are doing it a lot more, and I'm glad. One like that, like Smiling Jack and Steve Canyon, Johnny Hazard is one that I kind of rediscovered. Frank Robbins' adventure strip.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Oh, that's cool. He ended up doing Marvel work in the 70s, and he was doing The Invaders, doing Captain America stories from World War II.
Wow. Yeah, because those guys were like World War II addicts, then. And what was the Terry and the Pirates?
Absolutely, and that Kniff's before he did Steve Canyon, that was his first strip. Absolutely, man.
Yeah.
Good stuff. You mentioned Chicago. I'm based in Chicago. And a good friend of mine was your old play-by-play guy for the Bucks, Chet Kopic.
Oh, yeah, Chet. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I come from sports radio. It's comics are my passion, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I started the the podcast was to give these guys their due. You know, they're as I'm sure you know, as an admirer of comic books and graphic novels, I think these guys are coming up with incredible ideas and deserve the same kind of platform as filmmakers and great, TV screenwriters and the like, and novelists, certainly.
And they come up with these alternate universes that people can get into, and they become part of popular culture. It's great.
And I'm really glad that you're writing your essays. I really appreciate it. Wasn't it in the Hollywood Reporter where you kind of sat yourself down and watched 3 days of Fox TV?
Oh yeah, but sometimes that turns into a blur.
I give you the credit for being able to, get through 3 days like that. That's pretty tough, man.
Yeah, not something I want to be doing all the time.
I understand. Hey, were there other athletes that liked comics? When you were getting heavy metal in the 70s, were there other, Lakers or Bucks that enjoyed reading comics that you were aware of?
Not that I was aware of.
Oh, so it was kind of your secret, did you feel like you had to kind of be like, all right, I don't want anyone catching me reading this stuff, man?
Well, it's just that, that was work. I didn't bring the stuff I did at home to work.
I understand.
Or get upset that, the other guys weren't into it, because it's an acquired taste, definitely.
That's great, man. Are you aware of any of the, again, because, and one of the reasons why I mentioned the Hollywood Reporter piece is you're obviously willing to be on the front line of the current culture wars. And I'm wondering, are you aware of some of the stuff that was happening in the geek community? We're kind of having the same debate involving comics as they are in terms of, the current American society and even, obviously, the political game as well. Are you aware of what's happening in the geek community as far as that goes?
No, I didn't know there were any ongoing controversies or anything. What's happening?
Well, I think the people in the LGBTQ community, they want more representation, not only in terms of characters, but in terms of creators, writers, and artists as well. And then the right is complaining that a lot of the current writers, especially at DC and Marvel, they're saying that they're social justice warriors in terms of creating more female characters, more characters of color, more characters of different orientation. And they're like, hey, I just want my, straight up Iron Man, Spider-Man stories and don't put the politics in it.
Well, yeah, I think there's room for everybody. I mean, that's what we have to come to understand. There's no need to be fighting over all of this. There is room for everybody to have their say and have their moment and their little niche. There's nothing wrong with that.
I'm in agreement with you, sir. What have you had a chance to watch the films and the new TV shows? I'm interested. I think Marvel is with the Netflix shows they're killing it, and I wonder what your thoughts were.
Yeah, Marvel's been pretty good, and on the big screen the Alien series has. I'm getting annoyed, though.
Why are you getting annoyed?
Because they won't explain it, where these things came from and why. The very first one, or the first two, rather, you get an idea that the company that sent these mining ships out there knew what was happening and wanted to get nobody explains anything. There's been 5 or 6 movies, and I don't know, Sigourney Weaver is transformed into who knows what.
I don't disagree with you, man. That's awesome.
And then on the what was it, Prometheus? Mm-hmm. Right at the beginning, I'm like, oh, they're gonna, because it had seen, and then no, it's just, well, now what is it?
That's fantastic. We need you in the idea room, man. You gotta correct the writers' room, and no, man, you gotta go a different way. Did you feel that way back in the 80s when 2010 came out? It was just on Turner Classic Movies this week, and I have to say, I do like that movie a lot, but it really is kind of a simplistic answer to the Rubik's Cube question that Stanley Kubrick asked of us back in the 60s.
Well, at least as an initial explanation of that particular happening. I thought it was well done. I thought they needed some follow up by the writers to explain how that developed into some kind of story that we could get our teeth into, because it was intriguing what happened.
Agreed. No, and I hope they eventually will do the third book that Clark made, where somebody unfreezes Frank Poole in 3001. And I remember that coming out about 20 years ago or so.
Yeah, that would be interesting, wouldn't it?
I know you're a big a jazz fan, which I really admire as well. And truly, back in the day, and forgive me for bringing up a bad memory, but when your house burnt down and your jazz collection burnt up, seriously, man, I'm like, oh, that's horrible. I mean, obviously the tragedy in itself of the house, but to also lose that incredible jazz collection, that's just heartbreaking.
At least it was fate. It wasn't like, an old girlfriend came and destroyed it or something like that. It was fate, and no one got hurt. I could with it. And everything has been re-released by now on CD.
That's true. Are you now, as someone who really did grow up such a jazz purist and stuff, where are you on the vinyl versus CD debate?
This CD is so much more accessible, and I like the fidelity. I don't. Sure. You play a vinyl, and it sounds like somebody's frying an egg. In the...
That's interesting though, because sometimes the string instruments sound a little purer, and even some. I don't know, man. I understand what you're saying, and maybe depending on the level of recording, and especially the 40s before really multi-track recording started happening and stuff. No, I get that. Are you also a jazz fan in terms of, even if fidelity isn't good, where you find like a 1939 Billie Holiday performance, and you're like, oh, that's fantastic, and do you get excited as far as that kind of historical live recording versus the beautiful stereo of a studio?
Well, I really have enjoyed the way they've re-engineered some of those old recordings and gotten so much more out of them. There was one that was a Carnegie Hall performance by Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie.
Wow.
And they just found it, only like about 10 or 15 years ago, and they re-engineered it for today's sound and put it on a CD, and it's incredible.
That's awesome, man. Sarah Vaughan and Dizzy Gillespie, I got to see them live before they passed, and I was very pleased to have those experiences. Are there any current jazz recordings or anything in your collection that you're willing to recommend to the audience?
Geez, I can recommend a relatively new artist, Robert Glasper.
Okay.
He's a pianist. He's awesome. There's a vibe player, Warren Wolf. I love the
vibes. That's fantastic.
Yeah, check out Warren Wolf. You'll really like him. And we just lost Bobby Hutcherson. That was tough on me.
I hear you, man. No, and what does Glasperger play?
Robert Glasper.
Or Glasper.
He's a pianist.
Oh, he is a pianist. That's fantastic. All right, cool. Because I'm an Oscar Peterson guy, and certainly Monk.
You'll love Robert Glasper. He's incredible.
That's awesome. Well,
and he really respects the tradition.
That's fantastic. And isn't it interesting? It's really hard to find. I don't know where you live, if there's a good jazz station to kind of keep us abreast of what's going on. In Chicago, it's really hard. And frankly, I watch the jazz channels on my cable system to kind of find out, newer artists and what's going on and newer bands.
Go online. You can get WBGO out of New York. That's WBGO out of New York, and you get K-Jazz out of L.A. here. We have a great jazz station.
That's awesome, and it's shameful. Well, at least Chicago's still representing as far as the blues go. We've got some good blues shows still in Chicago, so we're
right. And just the whole live blues performance thing is still happening in Chicago, and I really think that's what keeps it alive. I'm happy that's going on.
That's great, man. No, and I agree. And we just had our Jazz Fest at the beginning of September and stuff, so I agree with you. No, that's good. Like I said, I kind of wish that radio would still represent, especially being a radio guy myself, but what are you going to do? But that's good. You gave us two good streaming jazz recommendations, so that's excellent. Well, I don't want to keep you, sir. You've been gracious with your time, and congratulations on the wonderful Mycroft Holmes work you're doing. I hope more stories are coming in the future.
Right, and just the whole live blues performance thing is still happening in Chicago, and I really think that's what keeps it alive. I'm happy that's going on. That's great.
On the wonderful Mycroft Holmes work you're doing. I hope more stories are coming in the future.
And continued success to you, and thanks for all your helping me promote the Apocalypse Handbook. I'm really thankful of that.
Oh, it's our pleasure, Kareem. No, it's a great graphic novel, and I'm really glad you're doing both prose and graphic novels to explore Mycroft Holmes. And further, thanks for still being on the front lines, man, because we need people like you that have the perspective of the social changes that have gone on in the past and they're going on right now. And it's great to have your perspective and influence on what's happening.
Well, I'm happy to share, and thanks for listening.
Kareem Abdul Jabbar. Check out his Mycroft Holmes stories. All you got to do is Google search for those titles. He had a graphic novel from Titan, also released an actual prose novel of Mycroft Holmes. And, my God, read his essays at the Hollywood Reporter. You will not be disappointed. This is a great mind that is sharing his thoughts and perspective at a time when we really need perspective to cut through all the bullshit. Kareem Abdul Jabbar on today's Word Balloon. I hope you enjoyed it. It was brought to you by Aftershock Comics. As I've said, Aftershock is a fresh voice on the spinner rack and our shelves of our favorite local stores, bringing us great entertainment from some of the top writers and artists in comics. Man, I'll tell you, Ryan Kelly, Juan Doe, name a couple where I really appreciate their art, alongside the great storytelling of people like Marguerite Bennett and Tim Seeley, Cullen Bunn, Phil Hester, Matthew Klickstein, Stephanie Phillips. Great minds, great stories, amazing stuff, genre-bending stuff. I'll tell you, the one guy I really hope to talk to, especially before this Halloween season is over, is Joe Pruitt about his horror anthology, Shock, which collects some great stuff from great creators over the years. And Joe and Mike Martz, I think, are doing an excellent job at Aftershock, curating the line and getting some really interesting people to tell stories that you're not going to find at a DC or a Marvel or even a Dark Horse. In some ways, they're kind of filling that gap that we've lost since they walled up Vertigo. But I love their books, and I'm really happy and proud that they've been a sponsor of Word Balloon for over a year now. Check it out for yourself. You'll find full story descriptions, preview pages, and the diamond codes on their books to order through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. Word Balloon also brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. That's who I call my Word Balloon subscribers via Patreon. As I said, you're really helping me out, man, and you're really supporting the product, and I greatly appreciate it. Less than 10% of the Word Balloon audience supports me via Patreon. And like I say, Word Balloon's free. I want everyone to hear this. I want everyone to hear these talks with Kareem Abdul Jabbar or James Tucker, who's being another episode that I'm dropping later today. They're great conversations, and I really think help us appreciate where the art is. As Jabbar said in his essay, high art versus common art, he didn't use the phrase low art. I don't think of low art as an insult. Low art is things like tattoo art or a lot of the great lowbrow art. I mean, things like the surfer art of the 50s and 60s. And again, comic books are always part of that milieu as well. There's really some great moments, as we know, from the pop culture nerddom. Kareem knows it as well. And thank you very much, League, for appreciating what I do in terms of talking about this kind of art and how it impacts our society and its evolution. And like I said, man, when you hear the James Tucker interview today, I think you're going to enjoy it because it was a great conversation and it really is a great examination of where American animation has been and where it's going and where it's at right now. And James has been a huge part of that evolution. So it was really great to talk to him for 2 hours about the evolution of Warner Brothers animation and all the great things that he's done over the years, not only with the DC universe, but as I always like to say, one of my favorite things that James ever made was Scooby-Doo, and it was a Blue Falcon Dynamite story where it takes place at a Comic-Con, and they're going to reboot Blue Falcon and Dynamite as a new concept. Dynamite is absolutely like a killer robot that's shaped like a dog. Blue Falcon, very grim and gritty, like the direction that a lot of the DC movies have gone. And of course, it's a classic Scooby-Doo mystery, and the suspect is the old Blue Falcon, almost Adam West-like actor. He didn't do it. It's a great story, and it's really well done, and great use of the Hanna-Barbera adventure characters at this pseudo Comic-Con where they're investigating the mystery. It's seriously, and I'm an old school Scooby-Doo fan. I remember when it was brand new in 1969. This is a fantastic movie that you absolutely need to see. I'll tell you more about it on the Tucker interview. But really, we have great conversations about the characters and how they're being portrayed in the DC animated universe. James Tucker on the other show on Word Balloon. I hope you'll join us for that. And thank you again, League of Word Balloon listeners, for your patronage via Patreon. Patreon.com/wordballoon if you want to go to my Patreon page directly, or click on the Patreon ad on the front page of wordballoon.com. Thank you, League of Word Balloon listeners. And thank you for listening to this episode of Word Balloon with Kareem Abdul Jabbar. I still can't believe it. It's been 2 years that I actually got an opportunity to talk to this man. What an honor. I hope you enjoyed this representation of it. I thought it was kind of timely with him stepping in and, again, putting perspective on where Scorsese, Jennifer Aniston, and the anti-Marvel film people are coming from. Interesting stuff. More interesting stuff coming later today with James Tucker. Make sure you check it out, and more great episodes to come throughout this week and the month of October. Until next time, Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2019.